Welcome to the S&C Shop Talk Basketball Edition. Today I have some people on. We got 6 people on here today, all around the country. Today we're going to discuss technology and basketball, training, you name it. So I just briefly want to go around the table today. Let's have everyone kind of introduce themselves and really just discuss kind of the role of Sparta and their program. So Allie, why don't you start us off?
All right. I'm actually an OG Sparta member. I actually worked out at Sparta as an athlete when I was a kid, and then came back as an intern in college, and then started working with Sparta at Kansas 4 years ago as a GA, and then got hired full time and been here ever since.
Great. David?
Hi, my name's David Deets, University of Tulsa. Is there 2 Davids, I guess?
Yep.
And so I'm the director of basketball performance here at University of Tulsa. We use Sparta, in season twice a week, out of season about once every 3 weeks. We use it from everything to access, to drive programming, to, look at fatigue and risk of injury. So it plays a big role in driving decisions for us for sure.
Great. Other David.
David VanDyke, Assistant Athletic Director for Strength and Conditioning at Rutgers University. I work directly with the men's basketball program. We use Sparta to drive programming, to help us determine practice volume throughout the season. We'll scan once a week, and we also use it with all of our sports here on campus.
Great. Sean
Hayes, University of Georgia. I've been here for going on the end of my 9th year. We got Sparta. We tried to get it before the summer started with basketball. I work with volleyball and basketball. And so for me, it got a little late with basketball. So as I was in both basketball and volleyball, in the sense that I really wish I had it in the summertime to drive more programming and to get more data and to see it. So I really didn't get to implement a lot of the changes after about 3 weeks of testing and getting enough jumps in before I really got a chance to adapt it with basketball. And from there, I try to scan once a week with basketball throughout the whole year, in season and preseason, just to get as much data as I can each guy. And I try to really use it with our athletic trainer, with obviously assessing risk of injury, programming, mobility stuff, and really try to delve into that. And then this past off season, not to change topic of sports, but I was really able to use a lot with volleyball because I jumped once a week in season volleyball and got a lot of data from that. So I think it's a great tool for helping understanding what some needs are for some individuals.
Awesome. Stephen
Brindle, Associate Strength and Conditioning Coach at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm going on my 9th year here. We got Sparta in 2015, so it's been a number of years now. And we have 33 different teams here at Penn. It's kind of, a lot of the Ivy League teams, we have a ton of different teams. I work with men's and women's basketball and 4 other teams. And I use Sparta to really help drive programming. I break the teams into separate groups based upon their lowest variable on the plate. And we'll start the day with those type of movements before I kind of mainstream the group and have everyone do stuff together. So I'll have a load group, an explode group, and a drive group, and test about every 3 weeks. But I am intrigued by some of the people mentioned and how frequently that they assess on the plates. So, yeah.
Awesome. And Zack
Zillner here. I work with women's basketball at the University of Texas. First started using Sparta back when I had the same role at Kansas. I think we were one of the first schools to get them, so it's kind of cool to see how it's evolved through the years. We test anytime in season after an off day, and then out of season every Monday. We just use it to drive programming, and then as an education piece for the kids so they can see, like, I haven't slept well, I don't eat very good, and my numbers are dropping, or vice versa. They're doing a good job on the stuff they can control outside of the court, and see their numbers go up.
Awesome. So, I know a lot of you touched there on how often you assess, and David Deets, you talked about twice a week there, in season that you're assessing the group. What particular are you looking for when you're assessing, and how are you making adjustments off of what you're seeing there in season?
What I'm looking for in season is, risk of injury. And so if a guy pops up triple risk, okay, now you need to come in and see me, 2 times, 3 times a day so we can, get that scan back to normal, or is it caused by tightness or fatigue? So a lot of times the injury, the triple risk is because of tightness or a lack of, firing patterns. And so we determine which ones of those is, and then we have a game plan for that to get it back to double or single risk. And then also to look at fatigue. Is it caused by fatigue? And if it's caused by fatigue, all right, what are we going to do? Are we going to, hold him out of practice, or are we going to limit some of his time in practice? And so one scenario, I had a kid one time, it was when I was at Mississippi State, so it was 4 years ago. We had a kid pop up, triple wrist or ACL, and it was because of fatigue. So we let him practice. It was on a Saturday. We let him practice, brought in a massage therapist, did recovery boots, he did ice bath, he did, and did it again the next morning. So we did within like a 14, 15-hour span, we did that twice. Brought in massage therapist, recovery boots, and ice bath, and I rescanned him, and he was worse than he was the day before. And so we had a day coming off on Monday, and this is on Sunday at like 1 o'clock. I scanned him again, and we had a day coming off on Monday. And so I went to coach. I was like, man, this guy is fatigued. Nothing that we did helped. We have to shut him down. So we shut him down that Sunday and Monday. I scanned him Tuesday morning, completely normal. And so that's what I use it for, to drive decisions with fatigue like that. And then also, like I said, if it's triple risk because of mobility issues or tightness, they have to come in and do extra stuff, pre-practice, post-practice, and see me a couple times a day until it goes down.
Well, that's great. In my experience, I use this for 4 years plus working in the baseball realm, and we assessed every 3 weeks during that time. We were trying to see that adaptation over that phase of training. But looking back on that time now, gosh, I wish having the plates right there, I wish I would assess more frequently, and you're talking once or twice a week, and just having like an action plan in place kind of for specific situations, and try and avoid any kind of car crash that we can. And I think that's great too, because, people ask how often should we assess, and the answer is really however often you want to take action on that information and make a change. And so one thing I noticed that you said there, David, you talked about, interaction with the sport coach. Was that something early on that you could have those type of conversation, or did that take a little bit of time to build that trust and talk about maybe pulling the reins on some of these athletes or not?
I think it comes back to who your head coach is, honestly. And because I've had, where I've been in a situation where the men's coach was 100%, on board with it, and did, if I told him this guy needs to be shut down, this and that, he's triple risk, he would do it. On the other hand, I've had a female women's team where I told the coach she's at triple risk for her foot. She had to have surgery after the end of the year. Like, no matter what, she wasn't coming in to do extra. He wasn't pushing her to, come in. And so I think it depends on who the head coach is, and if he's willing to buy into the technology and the information that you give them. The last 2 guys that I've worked with, Coach Hayes here, same way as Ben Howland was there, is, he loves it, and he believes in it, and he, we have conversations about it. He knows about it. And so as much information as you can give your coach about it, and the more that you can have them see the guys jump, the more, they can see your girls jump and explain what it means to them and break it down to where they can understand it. so that they're just not thinking that you're just trying to shut a kid down just because you're being soft. Well, no, that's not it at all. Like this is going to help us in the future. And I'll go back to when I first got Sparta. I had a kid pop up for triple wrist for hip and core. And I was like, man, and he practiced that day. That day he strained his psoas in practice. And I was like, holy smokes. And so from then on, that's when I started coming up with protocol on what happens if a guy pops up. What can we do to try to get them back so we're not putting them at risk out there. And so I think when the coach saw that the first time too, and then when I've shared stories of, when I came here and brought Sparta with me here, when I shared the stories with coach of the experiences I've had with it, he's like, this is something that we need to get. And so he was on board about it.
Definitely makes it easier.
Yeah.
I'll leave this one open to the group here, but there's definitely a psychology aspect to this too, especially if we're talking about in-season assessing, right? If the athlete, sees something maybe that's a little off or feels like maybe they're not performing at their peak, how does that impact them? Are we having that discussion with them in season when we make these changes? How much education is involved, especially in this in-season time when like the psyche is so important to them going out there feeling good and performing well? Is there anything that you guys have noticed?
One of the things that I've tried to do with whenever they jump is like, everybody wants to know, did I get better? Like, how did I do? And, if it goes down, I tell them, it's an assessment we're doing every week. It's part of the process of making the best decisions. And it doesn't mean that, if you went down, you're not as good of an athlete. Because I think, I take a little bit different approach than Coach Deets does, where like I've had people pop up as triple wrist, but nothing's ever happened. And I don't know if we're just lucky or what it is, but they've still played because we had to play them. They're our best player. And so for me, I tell them, we want you to get better. We want you to trend up. And it's a conversation starter for me to be able to say, okay, well, if your numbers are way down, like, why do you think that is? And get them to start taking a little bit more ownership of their lives and what's going on their day-to-day, so that they can be a part of the process to understand, okay, it's not just what you're doing in practice, not what you're doing just with me, and whether it be extra work or in your lift, but your lifestyle, your sleep habits. What are you doing with our athletic trainer? Getting in the boots and doing your recovery. So I try and get them to not be too scared, because like my concern with anything where we're saying, okay, you're at injury risk, is like, okay, well, are they going to play hesitant? Are they going to be concerned? And if you say that they're at injury risk and they go out there and play and they don't get injured, are they going to believe you the next time that you say that they're at risk for an injury?
Yeah, for me, I agree exactly, and I kind of use the same thing that David said right there. It's a conversation piece with your athlete, right? Hey, what are you doing? Are you eating? Are you sleeping? You're hydrating, and I think that's the biggest thing. It creates a conversation piece and a point, something to touch on with your athletes, and whether it's like said exactly what I was going to say, so I hate to repeat it, but it's all right. What do we have to do from there? Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Are you hydrated enough? What's going on? And I agree. I don't highlight, hey, you're at risk for injury, because I don't want that to be part of the psyche. You're in the middle of the season. We get guys playing 35 minutes. For me, I could tell my coach, hey, for our best player was a guy named Nick Claxton. Hey, Nick, Nick's worn out. We got to do this. He would listen to him. Hey, maybe we got to practice a little less. But I don't think he would shut him down. And so you still have to do things, and how do you recover? And if you educate the athlete of why you're doing it, how you're doing it, I think don't highlight, for me, my situation, highlight that, hey, you're at risk, but highlight the other parts of the conversation. I think it worked really well with our guys. And that's all you can do is let it be a conversation starter, so you can start the process of letting them see why you're doing it, and let them trust the process of what the testing is doing for you. Because when you first do it, they have no clue what they're doing. They jump, and a guy who can do a standing vertical jump, or lady, whoever you work with, and all of a sudden they see a 15 or 19 pop up there. They're like, whoa, wait a second, I jump higher than 19 inches. And then you got to go through this whole explanation of why this is this. So if you can get them away from all that kind of stuff and highlight the conversation starters of what's going to make you better, I think that's the psyche of it, especially of it in season.
Yeah, I think for me, it's more a matter of maybe just having a conversation with the athlete that, hey, your numbers might have gone down, but this is going to help me give you what you need today. And that becomes the conversation instead of worrying about, hey, my numbers went down. Okay, well, this force plate's allowing me to give you the workout or the mobility or the stiffness or whatever that you need today. So that takes their attention away from the injury risk part of it and more in terms of, hey, my strength coach has my best interest at heart. They're going to adapt my workout for what I need today. And that way the education piece becomes more about the individualization of the programming.
Yeah, I think they like the individualization of the programming, just to say every day you come in different, you know, whether you practiced a bunch yesterday or you had a day off or this and that. All those factors come into play. So it's a great conversation piece. We hydration test our girls just randomly through the year. And one time they all came in dehydrated and all their numbers were coincidentally down. So that was a great piece to, you know, harp on these kids to drink water. Hydration is important. So another education piece that they can use to excel.
Yeah, I think in season, I'm agreeing with what everyone's saying as far as focusing on just trying to stay positive, whatever the scan gives you, and just talking about that individualization piece as far as like, hey, we're going to give you the exercises needed to help improve this. But in season, I've also found, and I've heard Andrea Hootie mention this a few times at conferences and just speaking to her, just like in season, I think she sometimes calls it like the 18-2 rule. So they're playing basketball, practicing games close to 18 hours a week. They might be with us 2.5 hours a week. And we're focusing part of that time on those, if you want to call them whatever, correctives or exercises that they need to improve those variables. So what I try to do is I have pictures up in some charts in the weight room of what a guard's profile ideally looks like, what a forward's profile ideally looks like. And in season, I might say, hey, look, all right, you're a guard and your explode is super high, but your drive is somewhat low. Like, hey, well, just so you know, this is what, you know, is actually somewhat ideal. We just want to bring up this lowest variable. We just want to bring up this weakness so that you can stay on the court, but don't freak out. Don't be playing with a bunch of fear. I want you to stay positive and focus on kind of like you are gifted. We just want to bring up this lowest variable.
I don't want people to get it twisted a little bit, because when I talk about that information I share with the head coach, I don't share that with the athlete. I have them come in and do extra because, like he said, 18-2. So if a guy pops up triple risk, I'm not going to just ignore that and have him go the next day when we have practice. I scanned him 2 days before the game. We lifted 2 days before the game. Now we have time that he could come in and do extra mobility stuff. I'm not going to ignore that and not do it. So I'm just like, hey, man, it looks like you need to do extra mobility stuff. I need you to come in tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, see me. We're going to do extra mobility. I'm not like, you're a triple risk, man. If you go out on the floor, you're getting hurt. Like, it's not the way that I do it. It's not the way I handle it. So I wanted to kind of clear that up. That's for the triple is for me and my coach to know. And so we don't let the athlete know that. We let them know when they need to come in and do extra, and that just drives those decisions for us.
No, absolutely. And that's a good point. Thanks for clearing that up. It's, you know, some of these athletes are obviously way more cerebral, and some of them are just like, okay, where do I go next? And so understanding these guys and girls and how can we talk to them. So I just wanted to clarify for anyone that's just joining us or is kind of new to Sparta. I think looking at these variables that we're looking at, you know, with eccentric rate of force and concentric force, and then obviously impulse to or overall time or momentum to get through a movement. These are things that we're evaluating on the force plate to see the overall ability and sequencing patterns of these athletes. And being able to see this over time, especially like some in the room here today, have seen this for several years, and they start to see similar trends with athletes. I think it's understanding when to make tweaks based off seeing such a difference in their movement signature. You know, so again, the human body is so smart, it's going to figure out how to get there at the end of the day. So it's understanding when you see them moving in a whole different way, okay, is this a possible risk situation where they could get hurt because they're extremely fatigued, or how can I change what's going on here or help them to move better? I think like David talked about, okay, we got to get this person's legs under them. We got to get them moving better, more recovery. Is there anything, you know, as far as who, I think it was Zack talked about scanning them after off days. And I think early on, I always tried to, okay, let's always wait for that day when the athletes are fresh and let's scan them. And what I learned was that day never came. It just never showed up. And then even in you guys being in the collegiate realm, talking about sometimes how after an off day or a weekend thinking they may be fresh, we know what happens on college campuses, not always ideal. So where have you found the most success on keeping this on a regimen and doing it at the same time each week? Or have you really found that it is good to set a specific day after a few days off?
I always scan in season the first day we're back in the weight room. Some days that's a day off, and some days it's not because of the schedule. So either in the SEC, you play Wednesday, Saturday, or Tuesday, Saturday. So your day off's either going to be a Wednesday or a Sunday. So we're always back in the weight room on Monday. So I always scan on Monday. That way it was always consistent, and I wanted some fatigue scans also. I didn't want to have that perfect scan. For me, it didn't make sense. I wanted to kind of continue to do it, because for me, it's all about looking at trends. Because if someone, like Dave said it, like if you're going to, there's going to be times where you have to pop scan guys, because they do pop up with a triple or double red risk. So I'm always looking for trends. So if I can continually test at least once a week, twice a week if I had to, then at least you're looking for trends that all of a sudden, wait a second, because I know with Brian, I contacted you a couple of times, and Michael also was like, hey, wait a second, all of a sudden this guy's drive is through the roof. Why is that? And you guys gave me some great feedback on that when we initially first got the system. And so if you don't, for me, if I wasn't testing enough of it to try to understand what we're looking for consistently and not seeing those trends, I don't think I would have used it effectively enough as I have been able to. I think I could probably do a better job as I still get used to it. But I think I was always consistent, always the first day back in the weight room.
Yeah, we do something similar where like we play it on like a Tuesday, Saturday schedule for the most part. And we would generally do it on that Monday or Tuesday, depending on what day was I usually did it after a day off, and it sort of just worked out that way, that it was like a Monday or a Tuesday. And one of the things I found, like we've been doing this, we've had the system since 2017. And I was only doing about, every 3 weeks. And then after that first year, I decided I didn't know what was going on between those scans. So I wanted to get a more consistent scanning schedule so I could see what's really going on. It also allowed me to see like what was I got, try to give me a better idea of what each individual's scan characteristics were, so that if something did change, I would know that, okay, well, is that a deviation from what is normal for him? So I have a guy who's like chronically low drive, and he's always down below 45, but that's normal for him. All of a sudden he's above 50 on drive when he hasn't hit above 30 in the last couple of weeks. I know that's something I need to talk to our athletic trainer, talk to our coach, talk to him, and see what's going on. So try and look for those deviations from that individual's scan characteristics.
I think it's good to scan. I mean, ideally, if they're fresh after an off day, that'd be great. But also, like, we've done it when they've had a super fatiguing practice. So if, the beginning of the season, when those long 3-hour grinders, it's good to see how the body handles it the next day. Like some kids, it totally trashes them, and other kids, they're just not even affected. So it's cool to see just how different people respond to different stimulus on the court.
I would say this too. I'd be curious to know in season, especially after the travel or a long trip, how willing are these guys to, right before the workout or whenever it is, get on the plate and do the jump? Are a lot of them, is it tough for a lot of them? Because I know, again, this population, they always want to train and they always want to be sore. So it's pretty, I'm just curious, like, what's it like when you come back and you have to do an assessment? Is it, they know that what's being seen on them is going to go into their programming and there's going to be adjustments? Or is it like, hey man, again, I just jumped 20, 30 times last night in the game, whatever it was. How is that for you guys?
For me, it's a constant battle between wanting to jump them when they're semi-fatigued or coming off travel like that, but also knowing that, hey, am I going to get their best effort? But then is their best effort, like if them not giving best effort is truly how they feel, then that's an accurate assessment. But if they're just going in and being like, oh, I just don't want to jump, and then they're just, going through the motions, is that an accurate assessment? I guess I'd be curious to know what you guys have found that way. Because with my girls, at least, it's a psychological battle half the time. I'm like, okay, give me your best jump and you'll get this from me. Like, I'm just like pulling teeth sometimes. I feel like to get a jump after a hard game or whatnot.
I agree that, like, I'll have I'll have a guy or two that doesn't want to jump because he doesn't want to hear it from his teammates that he didn't get higher than him, because there's that competitive component, because we incentivize, or we give standards for what each guy should be doing, and there's a competitiveness when they get on the plate of what they're they look at their jump height more than anything, because that's the basketball players. But I've had guys like, I can't jump, I don't want to jump before practice, and then he goes through and practices for an hour and a half and looks great, but he didn't want to. But I think that having that, like, knowing like that is information. That's information that can help us make decisions moving forward, even if he doesn't want to jump. So while it might not be an accurate assessment of what his ability to react to gravity based upon what he puts in the force plate, but I think if you're scanning enough, it's going to average out so that you can sort of eliminate maybe that one if it's an aberrant scan because he just didn't want to jump.
I scanned so much, so I got to know when guys were deciding not to jump. And then if the peer pressure does help out, there's no doubt. Sometimes it does affect what's going on. But if you have someone that jumps and it says 16, the next time they jump it says 19, then it's like, come on. And then you got to give me a break here. Is that really how you're going to jump, or is that really how you feel? And then the same thing, I think what you said, Alex, then you're going to get that out. It's almost like you're going to get out of what you put into it. And I think the more you can educate and talk about it, I think that's where it's at. But I think there's sometimes you're just going to get a lazy jumper. And then I just myself, I got a great GA that helps out. And then hopefully a little peer pressure kicks in. Like, is that really the best effort? Because, that's not the effort I'm going to expect you when you hit the weight room then. And then I'm going to expect that you're going to do something else in the weight room. You're going to go, I'm going to push a little harder if you're not that fatigued. So give me a real effort. So I think it's just a constant battle. Like you said, it's constant education and it's just a constant conversation piece. And for me, I'm just continuing learning how to work it best. I wish I was smarter in knowing better ways to do it. But I'm still new to it, and I'm just trying to learn as I go.
Isn't it funny how these athletes can go out there and perform in front of 30,000, but they're insecure in front of their own teammates doing a jump? Like, that's hilarious to me. But anyone else want to weigh in on that one right there?
Yeah, I think it's a good talking point to kind of see, like, this stuff's going to make you better. So if you're not willing to put in 30 seconds to jump 6 times, like, I think we have bigger fish to fry than, what exercises we're doing if you aren't even willing to jump maximally 6 times. So I think that's a talking point. I mean, especially with coaches, we talk about making these kids tough and all that kind of stuff. And if you can't even jump 6 times after a game, like, we need to reevaluate something.
I've had a kid tell me it's not the jumps, it's the warm up for the jumps that they don't want to do. And then I'm like, think about what you just said. So go out of the weight room, come back. If you're not even willing to do the warm up for the jump, for the lift, we got serious problems. So that's almost more of a resistance than the actual jump test itself.
Yeah, I think too, just to clarify, for the listeners, is you know, when we're getting 6 jumps from the athlete, we're going to take and average the top 3 jumps, which are going to be most indicative of that athlete's most natural movement pattern. So there's certain times that, yeah, you might get a, you know, a half-ass jump or something right there, but a lot of times that's going to be kicked out. We're not going to analyze those trials. So it is good to know that, hey, if you are getting 6, I mean, hopefully at least a few of them are a little bit better, maybe towards the back end or on the front end. So not looking at every individual jump.
I get sometimes where guys get frustrated is those real bad hip injuries, and they get the error that pops up 4 times in a row. And our guys that jump the highest are the worst. Are the worst on it. It's funny, but it's getting them, like, trying to convince them, go back on there. Don't shift your body weight that much, and that's been my biggest battle. I don't know what everybody else has there with that battle, but we got a couple guys that get on that plate, and it will take them 10 stinking jumps, and they get so frustrated. And it's like, stop doing what you're doing and jump the right way, and it won't do it. Then their answer is, well, I don't jump as high. And it's like, oh, that's okay. We need you to jump the right way. So I don't know if anybody else has had that problem.
Yeah, I'll speak up on that, Sean. We just got the newer plates and like the new system in January, because I used to have that problem all the time with athletes, especially the ones who are, you know, your best jumpers and who had that super high explode. If they would kind of rock back like on their feet and not push their whole foot through the floor and through the plate, I would get those errors. And then with a lot of my female athletes, when they would go down and jump, something would be weird with their counter movement where they would kind of like go down like this and kind of delay before they jump back up. I was getting errors on that, or it would say a few times like common height not reached or something like that. And with the new system, so I'm not sure, I'm not even trying to be a salesperson or anything, or I don't know what your budget's like now, but the new system and the new plates, I almost never get that issue, because it would happen a lot and it would buzz and it would get some athletes would get very frustrated and get very annoyed. And then I would have to just really analyze, like, hey, make sure your whole foot is planted into the plate, and that way you're not going to get that error. Or with some of those other athletes who just didn't seem to know how to dissociate their arms with the counter movement, I would have to kind of train them in a sense. Hey, here's how I want you to move your arms. Don't pause at the bottom, and you shouldn't get an error. Most of the time that they wouldn't get that. But it took some time to figure out what was going on as far as to coach them up on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll chime in here because I get that error a lot, like a lot of times. And talking with Sarah from Sparta, you know, I shot her a picture of what the error was. I don't remember what it was, but she let me know that they were coming onto their toes too soon. And through that conversation, and I had a conversation with Cal Deets about, you know, trying to bring up drive, because that's the variable that I have the toughest time with my guys. And he suggested introducing some ankle rocker work. So we started doing that, and that seems to have helped. It also seems to have like helped with a couple of guys' drive. But yeah, I have the same problem with a couple of guys who just like have to slow them down and get them to learn how to jump a different way.
I don't know if anybody else does this or not, but towards the end of the season, I'll cut it to the 3 jumps and send it through, especially when we're scanning twice a week. I'll do 3 on the back end of the week. So the second time we jump at the back end of the week, I'll do 3 times. And to kind of go back to the original question, I try to tell our guys just to compete against themselves every time, but it's such a part of our program that they know when they come in that they're jumping, because every time they lift pretty much in season, they're jumping. And so it gets to be a part of the programming. They know it drives decisions. So I think that they're willing to do it. Are there times where I look at a guy jump and I have to jump on his ass because he's at 15 and should be at 19? Yeah. I mean, I think everybody's going to deal with that. And that's when I'm like, man, you're not even trying. You got to compete. Like, it doesn't matter what we do, we have to compete, you know, and that's just the athlete today, is you got to do competition stuff to get them to compete. And I think, you know, no matter what it is, whether it be the force plate or it be, you know, a agility drill you're doing or whatever you're doing, you got to get them to compete. And so I do towards the end of the season, whenever it's, we've been in season for 6 months, I will cut it down to the 3 jumps.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dave.
So we have it set for all of our teams at 4, just for logistical reasons, so that we can get through quicker. And I figured I'll drop 1 off and essentially hope that we get the best scores from those out of those 4. So, but yeah, I'm glad to hear that you take it down to 3, because I only do 4 year round.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just touching on that too. And even I remember, back when I was using it a lot more frequently when I was with the Colorado Rockies, those errors can be frustrating, not only for us, but for the players as well. I think that the one thing to remember is just that standardization is just so important in this situation, and only analyzing these trials that are actually done correctly. And I will say this, in my time using the plates, I would say that basketball players are the hardest population to work with. Just so long levers, just kind of funky, super springy. You will get more errors. Or I've seen more in basketball. And I was telling Sean, I think when I was out there in Georgia, that the basketball group will be the toughest group, because they tend to get a little more errors. They tend to be a little more funky. That's just kind of part of it. We only want to look at the good trials and the good data and use that. So yeah, it can be a little frustrating, but at the same time, there's extreme value in having some of those errors. But it's good to see, you guys are, knowing your team and cutting down on jumps, and especially like Deets is saying there in the back end of the week on that second round, hey, let's cut it down. That way the athlete doesn't feel like they're just getting pushed to the limit every day in there, and then come in and get an assessment and use that information. So I really want to use kind of this back half here to get into some fun stuff and some programming and some things that you guys have seen work and implement. David was talking about drive being the one variable he continues to have to work on with his team there. And I have a feeling it's pretty similar in a lot of your situations on keeping that drive up, just dealing with this type of elastic, explosive mover that is typically going to be, the higher concentric force, a lot more bouncy. So, from an in-season standpoint, I know that you guys are monitoring, quite a bit in season, once, twice a week. What are you doing from a training standpoint to really bring up the weakest variable? Because you really need to maximize this time. In season, there's so much volume. How can you maximize these couple sessions a week? And what kind of movements and or recovery modalities are you guys going to improve a variable like drive, which is overall impulse or use of momentum?
I think for us personally, we'll pair it up with their main movement. So for drive, if we did something posterior chain dominant, we'd add 2 mobility exercises with it. One of them is usually like an ankle or foot mobility, just because their ankles are so tight and their feet are so tight. And then usually like a hip opener or one of their, go-tos for that. Usually the kids are the smartest ones of knowing what they need. So they'll kind of tell us the area where they're the most tight at, and then we can give them a few mobility drills to tailor it more towards what they feel that's going to work. We found that if they actually think a certain exercise helps them, they're going to do it a lot more than if I just demand that, everyone's going to do figure 4, even though they would rather do a shin box variation, something like that.
I use, for me, I kind of use like an 85% rule, because one, I'm kind of fortunate in some ways, and in some ways you guys get a little fatigued from it, but we're in the weight room every day before we practice. And sometimes, and I'm not saying we're lifting every day, but we have the chance to do something every day, where we lift, we'll lift twice a week, but they're in there warming up, and it's worked out well with our practice, because our guys actually are more willing to do stuff in the weight room and to jog out to the practice court or the main court for practice than want to warm up out there. They see a ball and they just want to kind of shoot a ball and mess around. So what I do with my scanning is, if I use the 85% rule. So if 85% of the team has it, we're going to do it, because it's only going to help everybody else. I'm not saying it's perfect. It's worked really well. But like I think what Zack just said, everybody's got tight ankles because everybody's taped up or they sprain their ankles 1,000 times playing AAU. We all know that they need more internal hip mobility. Most of them probably have really tight external hip rotators too. So if you can make it easier for yourself, and kind of and bunch it up and say, okay, hey, 85% of this team has this issue, and all your big guys are this way and this way and this way. If you can, bunch it up and say, okay, we're all going to do this, it's going to benefit everybody. Everybody's going to benefit from more ankle mobility. Everybody's going to benefit from more internal hip mobility. Everybody's going to benefit from, more external, hip rotators and psoas stretches and piriformis stretches, excuse me. It's going to benefit everybody one way or another, because once you're trying to hit your weak links, and two, you're getting warmed up for practice. That's the way I use it. So that's kind of how I've kind of adapted it. And if I see overhead squats can help with some guys' mobility, why not do it with everybody? Because we don't really have great overhead squatters anyways. We're so tight on our T spines and so anteriorly pulled, just because of the nature of basketball, and all these kids want to do is bench press in high school anyway. So they're all pulled forward anyway. So if I can do something that's going to help
Ooh, awesome.
So I've done it two ways. The first year that I had women's basketball, I basically had two buckets, those that needed mobility and those that needed stiffness. I know I oversimplified it probably, but I basically tried to give them the ones that needed stiffness, nothing but stiffness, and the ones that need mobility, nothing but mobility in season, just to see kind of what would happen. And I think their scans maybe got a little bit better, but this year I kind of used more of the 85% rule, which was what you were talking about, in that everybody needs a little bit of everything, and maybe I'll give them, maybe a little bit more stiffness for the stiffness group and a little bit more mobility for the mobility group, but I didn't go as extreme this year, and I found that we were a little bit healthier overall. So it's kind of interesting. I've had success with both, but it's just a different approach that both seemed to work a little bit and didn't work the same amount.
I'm kind of like David. Every single one of my guys is a low drive, every single one of them. And so I kind of break it down into two groups from that, because within that, I feel like you have your ankle mobility guys and posterior, and then you got more hip tightness guys within the drive group. So, if you want to go in season at the first year, I'm kind of like Steve is. They come in, they have 3 exercises for them, and they do those 3. And then towards the back end of the season, I let them choose what they want to do. So I kind of give them ownership of their own scan in their own body, like which ones do you want to do, and let them do that out of all the different ones we've done. And then the same thing out of season, we'll have them come in and after our warm up, we'll do 3 things paired for their signature. And then within the workout as well, preseason and off season, we'll break it off in groups when we're lifting on our core lifts. And really, we got all drive guys right now. When I've had explode guys and I've had load guys, say for example, it was a front squat day. Our load guys would do hill elevated front squat. Our explode guys would do uneven weight front squat, and our drive guys would do rear foot elevated front squat. So we'd break it up into that, break it down into those as well for our core lifts.
Thanks for sharing that, David. What I tend to go to a lot, and I don't know if any of you still have it, I know this is from a few years ago, is this pamphlet here, and then there's a page that talks about the top 10. Now, I know Sarah from Sparta will mention this is slightly outdated, and because so many different people are using Sparta now, there's different analytics, especially if people are using the app and putting the workouts on there. I think that there's some exercises that have kind of have risen up to help improve, and some have kind of fallen down a little bit. But for that drive, I do a lot of stuff and I heard Phil Wagner talk about this, is kind of slow the movement down. So like with single leg RDLs, it's kind of hard to be super ballistic with them. You have to slow it down. With the Bulgarian split squats, as David mentioned, those rear foot elevated split squats. And what I've done is early in the week is done more of the strength based stuff. And then if it's closer to a game and I'm trying to make sure that there's going to be less fatigue, less soreness, I'll implement one of the plyos that might help that variable. So for drive, I found like single leg hops or, double leg broad jumps to help that. With my guys and my girls at Penn, I found that most of the signatures are a little bit related to their position. So the guards all tend to have that high explode and normally lower drive, but some of my bigs will actually have a high drive. And what I found across sports, I'm fortunate to work with so many teams at Penn, is when athletes are able to run linearly, uninterrupted for a good period of time, they tend to have a higher drive. So even working with football, like a safety will tend to have a higher drive than a cornerback who's more reactive, or an outside receiver will tend to have a higher drive who's having to run deep routes more frequently than a slot receiver. And so I found when you think about the game of basketball, like the bigs, they're going from block to block and they're changing direction some, but not quite as much as a guard who's getting pressed full court, a point guard and having to, to try to shake their defender and go between the legs and cross over. And it's just changing direction constantly. And I've also found particularly with some of my female athletes, and going through this issue right now with some of the girls on my team, is they have their guards and they have low explode, which to me, it really drives me nuts. And I'm finding out that they're going on extra runs, like around the campus, and doing extra cardio because they want to be fit. And that long, uninterrupted linear movement is actually making those drives go up, and it's actually impeding and not helping their load or their explode. And so that's a conversation piece I'm about to have actually next week. Our girls just had 2 weeks off after the NIT, and I get them back. We have a meeting on Monday, and there's a few athletes I have to have that talk with them on, like, hey, your drive has gone up so much recently because of all these extra runs and wanting to look good, but we want you to be, more explosive and improve that stiffness characteristic.
So what I've tried to do to bring up drive and to somewhat limited success was from when we start preseason all the way through the season, we'll add accommodating resistance to our exercises. So we'll use the recommendations that Sparta gives. So like most of the guys are doing some sort of single leg movement, whether it be rear foot elevated or a split squat, and have them work against bands so that they're having to produce force throughout the entire, as much as possible throughout the entire range of motion. And then we'll always pair up our drive guys movements with, like in the off season, during our warm up sets, they'll go with their shoes off for their warm up sets, and we'll have them roll out their foot with a steel rod. We cut up some old barbells into about 1.5 foot sections, and they roll their feet out. They actually really like that, and along with a couch stretch. And the guys like doing that. Like I'll have guys come in during the season and they'll want it like do a mobility course, and the guys will ask for the rod. And then for my only thing I've had really any kind of like major success with is getting explode to come up with my basketball guys. I had three guys come in over the summer with low explode. They came in as a rotational scan, and added like an extra plyo program for them, working on just that amortization phase and limiting that ground contact time. And it took a couple weeks, but along with doing a lot of like bracing dominant movement. So we were doing pin deadlift and trap bar deadlift with those guys, and seemed to have like a lot of success, especially with one of my guys. He completely flipped the scan. He was a low explode high drive, and went to a high explode low drive. So
that's awesome. What was the training age on those guys, Dave? On those low explode guys when they were first low explode, were they relatively untrained or more trained?
I think they were. The one was like relatively trained. The other was pretty untrained. And then the third guy was he was also very much untrained. The one guy who had been trained but had a little explode, he has some hip issues. I think he's got some geometry issue with his labrum there. So I think that's some of the issue that he's having. But yeah, I think as they've gotten to learn how to organize themselves to produce forces in the ground, especially against some type of resistance, they've gotten better.
Yeah, that's great.
I know another way that we've brought up drive is pulling from the floor. So like if we're deadlifting, pulling from the floor, longer range of motion, if we're snatching, cleaning from the floor. And that's just one extra way to just get a little bit of extra range of motion to bring up that drive.
Well, what I wanted to ask and what I'm kind of intrigued is, Stephen, I know you talked about breaking these up into these buckets, right? These load, explode, drive buckets. Are you guys seeing more success with really hammering their weakest link or their first need as the first lift in the session? Or are you guys adding these in or sprinkling them in with accessory work? And are you seeing more success with one or the other?
Yeah, I've always tried to put it in so the team will warm up and we'll do a similar dynamic warm up most days. And then after that, I'll have a load group, an explode group, and a drive group. And I also share the weight room with other teams, just as Sean was talking about. So I have to be mindful of that, of the flow. But I'll have, hey, load, you're over here doing this. You're all together. Explode, you're over here doing this. Drive, you're over here doing this. And I'll have them do usually one or two different exercises at the beginning when I think that they're the freshest, when I think that they're going to be able to kind of push themselves, exert the most amount of energy at the beginning of the session. That's what I've mainly done. And I've also found it really is dependent on how the athlete does the movement. So I showed that chart earlier that, Sparta has provided with those different exercises. But if an athlete is not bending well on their split squat, or their form is terrible on their single leg RDL, or week after week, they're just using the bar, or whether it's their trap bar deadlift to get up their explode, or their suitcase deadlift, or whatever the exercise is, a front squat to help the load. If they're not training that exercise with great intent and also with good form and pushing the loads, I haven't seen as much improvement when the athletes are really pushing themselves week after week. And that's a lot on my end where I got to do better at really pushing them. That's when I see a little bit more improvements on the scans, especially in the off season. In season, I try, but just because they're on the court so much and you get good at what you repeatedly do and those movement patterns you repeatedly do on the court, I found a lot more success in the off season improving them.
We actually split up the groups in their main lifts too, like late off season into early preseason. Like we've got completely different lifts. Like one group's doing partial range of motion front squat. That's their main lift for the day. Other group's doing back squat with long range of motion. So, I mean, like I said, one year we did do everything we did was to bring up explode or bring up drive. So I don't know. It's interesting to hear you guys and your different perspectives, but we've literally tried to do everything one way or the other.
One of the things that we try and do with our drive guys is trying to limit trying to limit any of the movements that would bring up explode or load. So for like my explode load group, I would have them do some sort of bracing plank, whatever that may be. And I would keep my drive group from doing that and have them do some sort of mobility movement instead of that. So try to use that, via negativa, whatever, like from trying to remove a stimulus rather than trying to add something to it.
No, I love that.
Hey guys, I got to run. I got a staff meeting, so it's been great. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. And so I just gotta bounce right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Cool. See you, Stephen.
No, that's fantastic. Is anything else on drive there? Did everyone get their piece in there on kind of improvement on drive throughout the course of the season? We good? Now, also, mentioning this, we talked about the 218 rule or the 318 rule, really controlling what we can control in season and trying to balance out that stimulus. Are you guys seeing, David talked about, getting those feet right. And I love that idea of really rolling out the bottom of the feet to improve that, that superficial back line and get that fascia right. But are you guys seeing, I know we're talking about lifts here and exercises, you guys seeing anything from a recovery standpoint and or soft tissue standpoint that you've had more success than not?
A couple of our athletes were lucky enough down here. There's a couple places that have float tanks, and some of our kids on their off days who are interested in this kind of stuff would go either do cryo or float tanks, and then the next day the float tank group they would go up like 6 or 7 points just after doing that.
In drive?
And their like total Sparta score would go up. So their drive would usually come up. So I don't know if drive's one of those things that, I noticed it really low on my stiffest kids. And I feel like at least when I get stressed out and whatnot, I feel super stiff. So I don't know if the float tank does something with relaxing everything, getting them back to being right. But the float tank kids went up the most. And then I was thinking, after practice, we could do the hot tub. And so we had kids who would get in the hot tub after practice. And then the next day their variables would go up in the drive group. So I don't know if that's just a crazy coincidence or we're onto something. I'm not sure yet.
No, we have float tanks available to us here, and I've seen the same thing. And then also with the hyperbaric chamber, I would say with cryo, not so much. And I've actually seen probably the reverse on the drive guys with the cryo. Their numbers actually got worse doing the cryo, but with the float tank and the hyperbaric, and the other one, we have a magnosphere available to us too as well. And those three things I've seen that it's helped with a drive not dropping during season. I don't know if I don't feel like in season our drive improves a ton. It kind of fluctuates a little bit, but I don't want to see it really drop through the bottom or really go through the roof. And so it's more those things. I feel like those modalities help keep it more normal than anything.
Yeah, totally. Like sometimes just playing for the tie, just trying not to let it fall anymore and increase that discrepancy is key, especially in season where that stimulus is so high. Now, you guys have float and hyperbaric there in Tulsa?
We have a facility that allows us, our guys they can call and get an appointment. They can do hyperbaric, magnosphere, and float anytime they want, depending on their class schedule, practice, and study hall.
Wow. That is beautiful. Man, I'm gonna be swinging through there next time we're around there. So, we talked about, float, cryo, stuff like that. Now, do you guys ever have access to masseuse at all by chance? And if so, have you ever tried pushing more of that low drive group into get hands-on work?
We have regularly scheduled massage therapists come in. I haven't looked at like that in relation to it's based upon who plays the most by minutes. So guys who get the most minutes, play the most minutes, get a full hour. But I haven't been able to look at that. That'd be interesting to go back and see if there is any difference. But it was usually on their day off, so we would have scanned the day after that.
For us, I rely on the trainer to kind of analyze that stuff, to be honest with you. For me, just working multiple sports, and our trainer works one sport. After we scan, we'll look at the scans together, and then for the recovery stuff, I really rely on him to set up for, obviously, we've got zero gravity chairs in our locker room with the Normatec boots, so they can, he sets up, make sure guys get on that. But the massage therapist, the cryo tank, and the cold tub, I kind of rely on him to do all that stuff. I think it creates a conversation, one, and a better relation between me and the trainer, but also two, I think with that, it's important for the trainer to be more involved in a lot of that stuff, because when he goes over injury report and risks of things, and he does the injury report every day for the coach, I think it's important for the trainer to be really hands-on and involved in that process.